The dollar still dominates global trade. It's the currency the world depends on. And yet, it can buy only a fraction of what it could a generation ago. Its share of global reserves has been quietly falling for decades, and that matters to you. Because when less of the world wants dollars, everything you buy gets more expensive. Still, most people assume the dollar's dominance is permanent. But every reserve currency in history has believed the same thing, right before it started to fade. The Portuguese real once dominated global commerce. Then the Dutch guilder replaced it. Later, the British pound ruled international finance for more than a century. Each one looked unshakable while it was on top, and each one followed the same pattern on the way down. Here's what most people get wrong. Reserve currencies don't collapse when they look weak. They begin to decline when they look strongest. When the world needs your currency, demand explodes. Other countries hold it for trade and savings. Your nation can buy more than it sells because the world wants your money more than your goods. At first, that feels like an advantage. But there's a hidden cost. To supply enough currency for global trade, you have to send more of it out than comes back in. Over time, that means running deficits year after year. You consume more than you produce. The system slowly shifts beneath you. Economists call this the Triffin Dilemma. And once that shift begins, history shows the same sequence tends to unfold, again and again. Let's start at the beginning. First comes dominance. Not financial dominance, but control over trade itself. The power that controls the routes, the shipping, the security of global commerce becomes the system everyone else has to use. That's exactly what the Dutch built in the 1600s. The Dutch East India Company had its own army and navy. If you wanted to trade across oceans, you used their system and their currency. The United States reached the same position after World War II. Global trade moved through American protected routes, and the dollar became the language of commerce. This is where the cycle always begins. But here's where things start to change, and where most people miss the shift. Once a country controls global trade, wealth starts flowing toward it almost automatically. Portugal saw this first in the 1500s. Portuguese ships brought spices, silk, and porcelain from Asia, then sold them across Europe at enormous markups. Gold and silver poured into Lisbon. The city became one of the wealthiest in the world almost overnight. Britain repeated the pattern in the 1800s. Its factories supplied textiles, steel, machinery, and ships to the globe. Raw materials flowed in at prices Britain largely controlled, while finished goods flowed out at huge profits. London grew into the financial center of the world, handling more capital than the rest of Europe combined. The United States experienced the same surge after World War II. With much of the world's industrial base destroyed, American factories supplied everything: machinery, automobiles, steel, consumer goods. Dollars accumulated in foreign central banks, and US gold reserves swelled to more than 20,000 tons by the 1950s, more than the rest of the world combined. At this point in the cycle, everything looks like success. Wealth rises, confidence grows, and almost no one notices that the very forces creating this prosperity are quietly setting up the next shift. The next phase is when dominance becomes official. For the Dutch in the mid-1600s, the guilder became the currency of international trade. Contracts were written in guilders. Bills of exchange moved through Amsterdam's financial markets because they were the deepest and most trusted in the world. Even rival trading powers used Dutch currency because it was simply the easiest system to operate inside. The United States reached the same moment at Bretton Woods in 1944. 44 nations agreed to anchor the global financial system around the dollar. Other currencies would peg to it, and the dollar itself would be tied to gold. This was the moment the dollar became the center of global finance. And this is the part most people miss. This is the peak. When the world needs your currency more than your products, something subtle begins to shift. Production gradually moves elsewhere. Imports rise, trade surpluses shrink. The system that once made you stronger slowly changes direction. At first, it doesn't feel like decline, it feels like privilege. And that's exactly why the next phase catches almost everyone by surprise. The direction reverses. Before we move to the next stage, Seeking Alpha's Alpha Picks has outperformed the S&P by over 65% since 2022, and you can get $50 off using the link in the description. Back to the reversal. The nation that once sold goods to the world starts buying more than it sells. Trade surpluses fade, deficits appear, And at first, it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like abundance. Portugal reached this point in the mid-1500s. Instead of exporting wealth, it began importing it. Grain from Sicily, textiles from Flanders, manufactured goods from across Europe. The crown spent heavily on palaces, churches, and royal prestige. As long as colonial gold kept arriving, the system looked sustainable. But little of that money went into building new productive strength at home. Britain followed the same path in the early 1900s. Imports rose while domestic manufacturing slowly declined. The country paid its bills with investment income earned from its empire, wealth created elsewhere rather than at home. The trade deficit widened year after year, even as London remained financially powerful. The United States entered this phase after 1971, when the gold standard ended and Bretton Woods collapsed. Trade surpluses reversed permanently. By the 2000s, annual deficits reached hundreds of billions of dollars. America imported consumer goods, electronics, and automobiles while paying for them by exporting dollars, a privilege that comes with reserve currency status. And this is the moment the cycle quietly changes. The country still looks rich, the system still works, but it's now running on accumulated strength rather than creating new strength. Eventually, deficits stop being manageable. And when that happens, governments reach for the same tool every time. They create more money. Portugal faced this in the 1550s. As trade revenues declined and spending rose, the crown reduced the silver content of its coins and issued more currency than it could realistically support. Prices climbed. Merchants demanded more reals for the same goods. Purchasing power quietly slipped away. The Dutch followed a similar path in the 1700s. A currency once known for stability began weakening as wars and colonial costs mounted. Borrowing became expensive, so money creation filled the gap. By the late 1700s, the guilder was no longer the preferred currency for international trade. Britain went through the same process across 2 world wars. Printing accelerated, gold ties were weakened and eventually abandoned, and the pound was repeatedly devalued. First in 1949, then again in 1967. Each devaluation chipped away at global confidence. The United States entered this phase during the 2008 financial crisis. Quantitative easing added trillions of dollars to the system. Then came the pandemic, and trillions more followed. The result wasn't immediate collapse, it was gradual erosion. Since 2020, the dollar has lost roughly 25% of its purchasing power. And this is where the cycle becomes visible. The currency still works, markets still function, but confidence begins to shift, slowly at first, then all at once. This leads to a search for alternatives. This is when the world starts looking for exits. Portugal lost confidence in the 1570s. International merchants began demanding payment in Spanish silver instead of reals. Trade contracts denominated in other currencies. By 1580, the real was functionally dead as a reserve currency. The Dutch guilder lost confidence through the 1700s. French, British, and other European powers began holding reserves in other currencies. By the 1780s, Amsterdam was no longer the financial center of Europe. London had taken that position. The guilder was still used regionally, but not for major international transactions. The shift was gradual but irreversible. Britain lost confidence rapidly after World War II. In 1949, Britain devalued the pound by 30%. International holders lost almost a third of their value overnight. Confidence collapsed. Nations shifted reserves from pounds to dollars. By 1960, the pound's share of global reserves had fallen to less than 20%. The transition was complete within 15 years. The US dollar is here now. The world is looking for alternatives, and some are finding one. The BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus 9 new members represent almost half of the global population and over a third of global GDP. And they just built an alternative financial system that bypasses the dollar entirely. Russia and China now settle 90% of their trade in rubles and yuan, not dollars. Brazil and China eliminated the dollar from their bilateral trade. India buys oil from the UAE in rupees. Until the last few years, Saudi Arabia only accepted dollars for oil purchases. Now it accepts yuan for oil purchases from China. This isn't a future plan, it's happening right now. Billions of dollars worth of trade moving outside the dollar system every month. At the same time, the BRICS began dumping US treasuries. Russia liquidated nearly all its holdings. China is not only selling, but it's also encouraging its banks to sell. They're actively selling American debt and buying gold instead. BRICS nations now control over 6,000 tons of gold in their central bank reserves. And they're not alone. Central banks in general have been buying gold in massive quantities. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 72% in 2000 to 58% in 2024. 14 percentage points representing trillions shifted out of dollar assets. And this matters to you personally. When foreign countries stop buying US debt, stop holding dollars, build payment systems bypassing the dollar's value collapses. And when that happens, everything you buy becomes more expensive. The US knows this. That's why it's looking for new buyers for treasuries, and they think they've found one in stablecoins, a cryptocurrency pegged to a stable asset such as the dollar. The recently passed Genius Act requires any issuer of US stablecoins to back its coins with US treasuries or dollars. In recent testimony before Congress, Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, said stablecoins could be an important feature of financing the US government and could generate a surge in demand for US treasuries. If you want to dive deeper into that, watch one of my other videos. The $38 trillion crypto debt reset just got confirmed. Now to the final phase, replacement. This is when a new system rises and the old reserve currency slowly loses its position. The Portuguese real gave way to Spanish silver in the late 1500s. Spanish silver coins became the preferred currency because they were abundant and backed by ongoing production. The real couldn't compete. By 1600, it was irrelevant. The Dutch guilder was gradually replaced by the British pound in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Britain's Industrial Revolution and naval dominance made the pound the obvious successor. The transition took about 30 years. By 1815, the pound was the undisputed global standard. Then the pound gave way to the dollar after World War II. Britain emerged financially exhausted. The US held most of the world's gold and had the only intact industrial base. By the 1960s, the transition was complete. So what replaces the dollar? We're not there yet. We're deep into the currency debasement stage and starting to enter the phase where the world looks for alternatives. The most likely scenario is a messy transition. Several regional currencies, the dollar in the Americas, the euro in Europe, the yuan in Asia, gold for settlement between regions. What should you watch for? Countries accelerating de-dollarization, countries buying less treasuries, treasury yields rising. Each of these signal a declining appetite for the dollar. The pattern is clear. 7 stages, 4 currencies. And the mathematics don't care about exceptionalism. They care about deficits, debt, and debasement. And none of this is personal financial advice. This is education so you can build your own plan. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe. We publish fresh content several times a week to help you understand the economy and protect and grow your wealth. If this cycle continues, the biggest unanswered question isn't whether the dollar weakens. It's who ends up financing the system when fewer countries want to. And that's exactly why the rise of stablecoins and the new crypto debt structure matters, because it may be the next attempt to keep this cycle going. That's what I break down in the next video. Watch the $38 trillion crypto debt reset just got confirmed. It's on the screen. In the description, you'll find links for a discount off Alpha Picks. You'll also see a link to my Wealth Builders Blueprint, a large collection of resources you can use to grow your wealth. I also included a link to Zacks Confidential, a more economical alternative to Alpha Picks. Check them out. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.